Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Adrian's Digital Basement. On today's video, we have a TRS-80 Color Computer. It's an original Rev D version from 1981 that was donated by a viewer recently, and it doesn't work, so I'm going to try to fix it. And before I get started though, I just want to mention that I'm feeling a little bit under the weather, so my voice is probably sounding a little raspier than normal. There's one more thing I want to talk about before we get started with the video, and that's that there has been some recent scam activity on my channel. And this is no different than it's been affecting many other channels out there on YouTube. There is a fake or multiple fake YouTube accounts that say, Telegram me, and then at Adrian, whatever, Adrian Black kind of thing. And basically, if you reach out to that person, the scammer is going to try to make it seem like you have won a prize, but you have to pay for shipping, which will be $150, $200, something like that. And they're going to ask you to either send them money through Zelle, PayPal, or most likely gift cards. And this is the standard playbook of all those scams that you see on the internet. So just know that if you're talking to someone on Telegram, that it is not me, and that it is a scammer. And the way to reach me is to do so via email by going to my YouTube channel and clicking on the About page, and there is an email button right there that will take you to my email address that you know is actually me. If it's something on Facebook, which I don't really use, that's not me. There is my official Twitter account as well, which of course I'll link in the description below. But otherwise, you're talking to a scammer. So just beware of all that scam activities. I try my best to block those accounts, to delete those comments, but they seem to be popping up pretty frequently right now. And this is a problem that plagues every creator on YouTube. It is not just me. It just seems that I guess I've gotten big enough that the scammers have paid attention. Okay, enough of the scam talk. Let's get back to fixing computers. So without further ado, let's get right to it. All right, here is the TRS-80 Color Computer exactly as it was seen on the Super Mini Mail Call episode when I first showed this. This was sent in by viewer Aaron, and he found it in his mother's garage. It came with a multi-pack, which is like a cartridge expansion unit and a floppy disk drive. In this video, I just want to try to fix the computer to get it working. Now, as you can see, we have a TRS-80 Color Computer 1. It doesn't say 1 on here because, of course, at the time when this came out, there was only one. It has a badge here for 16K, but this thing actually has 64K in it, at least according to what we saw on the inside. Now, the badge over here on the left side indicates that this is an earlier machine, and sure enough, on the inside, all the chips are from 1981. The funny thing is, this keyboard that's on here is a melted keyboard design, so it's called in the TRS-80 community. This came from the very end of the line of the original Coco 1 machines, and also the Coco 2 had this keyboard as well. So I guess this was some kind of retrofit for the original Color Computer because it felt better, I guess, than the chiclet keyboard on the original machines. Not quite sure about that. Now, if you watch the Super Mini Mail Call episode, this machine was really dirty and I cleaned it up, but it did leave behind this little bit of adhesive residue, which I haven't cleaned off. I'll do that at a future time. Before we take a look inside this machine, one of the things about the TRS-80 Color Computer 1 is that it only has an RF output, which is right here. So at some point, someone had installed this mod on the inside, which has these 3 wires that come out of it. And I had determined that this wire right here is actually a composite video signal. I'm assuming that at least one of these is an audio out, and I guess maybe there's an audio input as well. Not totally sure on what the deal is with that, but this cable here is video and I've labeled it as such. Before I take the cover off, let's just see how well this thing is working, or rather not working. It'd be kind of hilarious if it just worked. Oops, it's a little wobbly because there's a missing foot on the bottom. It would be funny if this thing just worked, but I'm pretty sure that's not going to be the case. So I have it plugged into the RetroTink. Let's turn this on. All right, there was a little bit of a video signal there. I'm going to hit the reset button here. Aha, okay, there it is. I don't know what was going on with the RetroTink there. It sort of was struggling to synchronize to the signal. Maybe it's somewhat non-standard that's coming out of this. Originally, when I was doing the testing, I was just using a little LCD VGA monitor, which was so blurry you couldn't really read it. But I can see on the screen here that we're getting alternating orange bars and green bars, and inside the green bars are @ symbols. Now I'll push the reset button again on the back, and we just basically get exactly the same thing every time. And if I turn off the computer and let's turn it back on again, let's see if it has that problem syncing again. No, it worked that time. And I notice on this power cycle, we have a perfect grid with no random characters on the side, but I think that's neither here nor there. That has to just do with the fact that we are not even getting proper initialization of anything. The video chip is being initialized, which is why we're seeing an image, but I don't think much else is being initialized on this computer. All right, so time to open this thing up. Now it is pretty cool that it has this period correct mod in here for the composite, because using RF is never any fun. And unfortunately with this machine, it's not as simple as just say, taking a wire that goes to the RF modulator. Well, or maybe it is actually. I know on the Coco 2, that is not the case, because the Coco 2 has the chip that kind of converts the output of the video chip into composite video. I think it's inside the RF modulator. And on this machine, that IC is external. Now again, if you were watching the Super Mini Mail Call episode, I have a Coco 2 board that I'm pretty sure works. And that board essentially has all the chips that this machine has in it. So one easy way for me to do the troubleshooting is to literally just remove all the chips from that spare board I have and stick them inside this machine. And that's because the RevD motherboard that's in here, as we'll see in just a moment, is entirely socketed. So that means that troubleshooting is really going to be easy. But I don't want to take that easy road, because later Coco machines have chips that are actually soldered onto the motherboard. So on those machines, you have to do the troubleshooting to figure out which chip is bad so that you don't go socketing all the chips needlessly, and you can zero in on exactly where the problem is. So this is the transformer here, the power transformer. It comes in through the power cord. I think it goes into that. But I'm not sure if there's any dangerous voltages on the top here or not, but I think there may be, and that's why it's covered up. So just keep in mind that potentially there's some high voltages in here. I don't know for sure. But once it goes through transformer right here, it goes onto the motherboard, and then that goes through voltage regulator here. There's a capacitor, actually a couple voltage regulators, capacitor to do the filtering and stuff like that, and then that powers up the rest of the board. Keep in mind, I mentioned this in the other video as well, there are two lengths of screws, longer screws in this part of the case, and I think for the keyboard, at least up in the front here, or maybe here, I don't remember exactly where they are, the ones that are towards the front of the computer is not as tall, so those screws are shorter. So don't mix them up, because I think if you put the long screws in the short spots, you could puncture right through the plastic and kind of ruin your day. Alrighty, so let's take a look at what we have going on inside of this machine. Now, as I said before, the voltage regulation, everything is on this side here. The original RAM configuration of this machine was 16K. There was a 4K model as well. I think they sold 32K models at one point, which is sort of a factory supported configuration on here. But this machine was upgraded to 64K, which is these beautiful gold Motorola RAM chips. And then these bodge wires down in this section are added to support the 64K. Because originally, like I said, there's a jumper, maybe that right there, that allows this to support 32K using 64K RAM chips natively. In fact, when I was doing some research for this repair video, I read that TRS-80 originally put in 64K RAM chips, but they were half bad. And that is exactly the same as the Sinclair ZX Spectrum. And it was done by having 8 64K RAM chips where half was bad, so it only used half the chip, and then had an additional 16K. Well, on this one, they installed 64K where half was bad, and I think there's a jumper, one of these jumpers here, that tells the machine whether to use the upper 64K or the upper part of the 64K chip, there's a top 32K, or the bottom 32K. And that's because originally 64K RAM chips were expensive, and you could get these sort of broken ones that were binned. So you'd have like a whole set that were either bad on the top half or bad on the bottom half, and you set the jumpers appropriately. Apparently, Radio Shack kept selling these machines, and that was a successful SKU for the 32K, but eventually you really couldn't get these bad chips anymore. So they were installing a good 64K of RAM onto the motherboards, and half of it would just be inaccessible to the user. So these mods here allow the computer to see the whole 64K, and I had a viewer send me instructions on how this mod works exactly. TRS-80 had a document on how to do it. So there may be a problem with the bodge here that is doing that. Maybe that's why this machine is not working. We'll have to investigate further. There's also some other mods going on here. There's these like extra wires here that come off the cartridge slot. I'm just going to remove those because they don't go to anything. And then you see this board right here. This is actually the mod for the RF modulator. So this chip is removed from the motherboard and then stuck into this chip socket here, and that plugs back in the motherboard. This is that chip. It's the Motorola, let's see what that is, MC1372P. This is the IC that converts the video output of the video chip and makes it composite, basically. But to do it, you need a little bit of support circuitry. So we have 4 transistors, 3 resistors, and it looks like we have a small little bypass cap there. When I first opened this computer, this had sort of been yanked out of the socket and all the pins were bent. I have since reinstalled it and I zip tied this on. I will probably have to take it off again if I'm going to remove this motherboard from the case. And then it just sort of fed out of the case here, over here by the RF modulator. Someone cut a notch in the case to make room for these wires. But this mod is kind of cool in that it retains the output functionality of the RF modulator for anyone who wants to use it. There is also this single black jumper wire clipped on right here to this pin on the RF modulator, and almost certainly this is for the audio signal that is coming from the computer that is now going to be fed out of these gray cables. There are a few other weird and unusual mods on here. There's a resistor here on the 6821. There's a resistor here that's sort of haphazardly going from that IC down to this capacitor here, and there's this resistor as well. This black wire here is part of the mod for the 64K upgrade, and it goes to this little IC right here. But I don't know what these resistors are here, so I may just end up removing those. I really don't think those are necessary. There is also this red baud wire here, which I don't think has anything to do with the RAM upgrade. I think it has something maybe to do with the keyboard, because it goes from that pin right there, and if I lift up the keyboard here and I move it, and it goes to right there on this little kind of an adapter PCB that goes from this pin connector, which would have gone to the original keyboard, to this thin ribbon cable here for this upgraded melted keyboard. Now, if you're familiar with these ribbon cables, like on this keyboard, they are very fragile and horrible, but I am going to gently remove this. Okay, it's coming out. There we go. I hope that wasn't the end of this keyboard, but it might have been. But I had to take it off because I needed to get the keyboard out. I suppose worst case scenario is if this part here is damaged, I'll just cut off a couple millimeters here and I'll use this part here, which doesn't look like it's damaged at all. There's sort of a hard piece of plastic back here to give it a little strength when it slides into that connector. When we look at the back of the keyboard here, it just says made in Japan, and there's a lot of dust, but otherwise it's okay, I guess. Now, from a mod perspective for the 64K, there's a couple ways to do this. I think the more common way is to flip the board over and cut some traces on the backside and add some baud wires. And you might have one baud wire on the top, while this has 2 baud wires on the top. But I think for now what I want to do is remove these wires, because I know those are bad, and then I'm going to do some poking around with the oscilloscope, and let's see if we can just see some kind of faults happening with this machine. All right, so while I desolder these, I'll just do a little bit of chatting as well. So I was doing a little bit of investigation on what exactly was going on with this machine, with that problem with those bars. And apparently, if everything is installed on the motherboard, but say the ROMs aren't working, you're gonna get that checkerboard pattern. Apparently the power on state of the system when all the chips are in, but if the ROM is not working or the CPU is not running, is that checkerboard pattern. This IC right here, which is the Motorola 68883, or also the 74LS783, it's called the SAM, and I guess this is part of the Motorola like computer in a box, because that's what this thing is, right? This is like a reference design computer. This chip, from my understanding, is kind of like the heart of the system. It allows the graphics chip to interface to the RAM along with the CPU, and it kind of coordinates bus activity, stuff like that. So if you take this chip out, which I did, because remember when I first powered this up, this chip was really warm, the computer didn't even output video at all. But that's normal. So you definitely need like the video chip, and you need the SAM chip, at least to get that checkerboard pattern. I don't think you need the CPU or the ROMs at all in there to get the pattern that we're seeing on this machine. And I mean, I guess I can test that by taking those out. But before I do that, I want to poke around with the oscilloscope. But that kind of says like if the CPU is bad, or the ROMs are bad, or the RAM is bad, or say something else is killing the bus, like maybe one of these I/O chips, then that might result in that checkerboard pattern. So 2 of these wires, let's see here, this wire, boy, these are really attached. So 2 of them are on the cartridge slot. one was on the motherboard over here and one was on the motherboard over there. So I don't know what these were or what they were doing, but let's try to get that off here. They weren't shorting, so I don't think our problem with the computer not starting has to do with these, that's for sure. Okay, so with those wires gone, what I want to do is give this machine a little bit of an inspection, and I just want to look for anything out of the ordinary, anything that looks like it could cause the machine to not start. Okay, so let's see, what am I noticing right off the bat? Here's a jumper that says 4/16K. So originally it was either 4116 DRAMs or another type of DRAM that was only 4K, and that's obviously what selected that. These are very similar to the 16K DRAMs that were in here, except these don't need to run on the +12 or -5 volts that those 4116 do. So I think there's most likely has to be cut traces, or some of these jumpers might do the same thing. And actually, I realize right here, this jumper says 32K. So maybe it's this jumper, and is it another one as well? That says 4K right there. This one says 32K. Yeah, I bet you it's these jumpers here that disconnect and connect those extra voltage rails to the RAM chips. So as long as you have those set correctly, and that's set to 32K, and that's set to 32K, because it says 16K right there and right there as well. So yeah, if those are set wrong, that would have killed this RAM. So I think what goes on with these bodge wires is you're basically just hooking up some extra, I don't know, to the MUX or something, addressing so it can address all of the memory. And this high and low switch here, which is telling it to use half the memory, isn't going to be used anymore. There are also some more jumpers here with 16 4K and 32K, and another one here. Those are both set to 32K, 32K, 32K. Yeah, everything needs to be set to 32K, I guess. And over here, I guess 16K is fine. Now, so of these ICs, I mentioned this one's that SAM chip, right? This is the sort of like the chip that orchestrates everything. That's the CPU there. That's the 6809E. These are the two ROM chips. One is the regular basic, and I think there's an extended basic ROM. Under here is going to be the graphics chip under the little video mod board. And then we have two I/O chips, 6822 and 6821. Originally, both were 6821s, but it's a total drop-in replacement to put in a 22. And I don't know if that actually adds any extra features, but the date code on this is 1984. So maybe that original one died or something like that. I think this one is handling the keyboard. So maybe that was necessary for this newer keyboard. I don't really know. Probably it got damaged. Who knows what happened. Before we get started with the oscilloscope on this machine, I want to talk about the TRS-80 Color Computer Technical Reference Manual put out by Radio Shack. I gotta say, back in the day, Radio Shack put out some of the best documentation for home computers, that was so detailed, especially because they had good quality schematics in there, but they also went over in great detail the system description and with block diagrams of how everything works, and just from a really good fundamental standpoint, talk about everything you need to know to do your troubleshooting on these machines. It wasn't just the Color Computer that had this. All the TRS-80 Model 1, Model 2, Model 3 machines had similarly excellent documentation, and this was all the way into the Tandy line of computers, Tandy 1000 line of PC compatibles that had similarly amazing documentation. I really, really, really have to give them props. I don't know how generally available this documentation was back in the day. Could anyone walk into a store and order this? But these have been preserved, and they are just amazing and so helpful for basically studying about how these machines work. All right, and I just realized that I wasn't doing my screen capture. I'm gonna chalk that up to me not feeling well. I made sure that it was on the right inputs and everything. Yeah, what we missed really was the screen capture of what this computer looks like when you turn it on. So what I'm gonna do, before we talk about the theory of operation of this machine a little bit, is I'm gonna plug the power back in, and we're gonna take a look at that screen so you can get a nice clear visualization of how it looks. Not to mention there's like the ever so slightest chance that removing these bodge wires here fix the computer. I mean, that's not gonna be the case, but you never know. So there it is. That is how it looks right now while it's non-functional. Now, if we look at this block diagram, which is a good representation of like what's on the digital section of this board, which is this area over here. All of this is like analog power supply stuff, so we don't need to worry about that. What's here is represented by these block diagrams. Now, we can really tell some key information on here. we can see that if this latch right here is bad, which connects the data bus of the RAM, or maybe the CPU, I think the RAM, I mean, it has an arrow pointing down here, but I have a feeling it goes this way to the video chip. If that latch were bad, then no information would ever make its way to the video chip. And even if the rest of the computer was working perfectly, we would never have any video display output. Consequently, of course, if the CPU is not working, well, we're not going to get anything either, because that's going to be clearing the screen and whatever. And if the ROMs are bad, same thing's going to happen. Also, though, I noticed that the video display chip has these wires here that come up from this 6821, the PIA. So obviously this chip plays a part in addressing or selecting the video display chip. So if this PIA is bad, which I think is this one right here, then we're never going to get any video output either. And I can confirm that because I was talking to a viewer, Paul, who was giving me some tips and tricks on troubleshooting this machine. And he confirmed to me that on this rev of motherboard, if you pull out this IC here, this is a 6822, the computer does continue to operate. And obviously you won't be able to type anything because this is handling the keyboard. If we scroll down here, it is this one right here. So keyboard and joystick is handled by the 6821, but it is this 6821 up here, which is this one, that is controlling the sound generator and the video display chip. And from my understanding, well, I thought it had to do with the 64K, but maybe not, because it actually looks like it's going to this chip. So that could be a potential problem, I suppose, as well. Anyhow, what this is really showing us is that there are several components that could be bad on this machine that could cause it to do what it's doing right now. And to be honest, any of these chips being bad could cause this problem, because even one of these 6821, 6822s, they could trash the data or the address bus, which could cause the machine not to work. Not to mention some of the RAM could be bad as well, because most like the 6809 is very much like the 6502, and you need a little bit of RAM, like the 0 page, to actually get the computer to work at all as well. So if there's a bad RAM chip, we're gonna have a problem too. So basically, anything could be wrong with this thing that could cause it not to work. Oh, I love this advice right here. It is always a good idea to isolate the source of a problem before trying to desolder chips. Excellent, excellent advice, especially for the fact that before the days of really easily obtainable desoldering equipment like the Hakko that I have, you could easily cause serious damage on a motherboard by trying to remove chips improperly, as I have shown on many repairs where someone did that and they burned the board and stuff like that. So you really want to figure stuff out before you take chips out. Okay, time to fire up the oscilloscope. Let's get to troubleshooting some of these chips here. Okay, so on the right, we have schematics. I have the CPU here, so we can take a look at the pinout there, and then I have the virtual bench right here. Now remember, virtual bench, expensive piece of kit. You don't need to use this. You can use any cheap oscilloscope, like I've recently reviewed a couple Handtech devices that are very inexpensive and are perfect for this purpose, and would be have no problem troubleshooting a machine of this type. All right, so on the CPU here, the first thing I'm gonna look at is the reset line, pin 37 right here. The reset line has an asterisk in front of it on the schematic because it is a low reset line, meaning when that signal is held down to ground, the CPU is in reset. So I'm gonna expect it to be low when the computer turns on, and then it should go high. Okay, it looks like there's a capacitor that sort of slowly raises it up. See that? Which I guess works. That's not great. I wish I had something a little more sophisticated, but that probably does the trick. Now, next I want to look for the clock signal, and what is the clock signal? It must be this right here, ON and EN. I'm gonna look at what's on pin 35, but I'm assuming that is a clock in signal, and then there's a clock out signal. So 34 and 35. Okay, so we're on ON or QN. That doesn't look good. What about the one next to it? All right, this is giving us a better signal. Let's zoom out. This is definitely a clock, right? This computer runs at 0.89 megahertz or thereabouts. And if we look at the capture right here, down here, we're at 894 kilohertz. So that seems correct. So it looks like we have a good clock signal and looks like we have a good reset signal. So next thing to do is let's start taking a look at these address and data bus lines. So here we are in the schematics. These are some of the RAM chips right here. It looks like we're only seeing a few of them, but there's more on a different sheet. And there is the 74LS244, which is that buffer that was on the block diagram. And I'm just gonna look on each of these chips on pin 2, and we're gonna make sure that we're seeing activity that looks befitting of a RAM chip. Now I can tell you right now that doesn't look like any kind of activity on that one. And I am right now on pin 2, which is the D pin. Let's check the pin 14 here. Okay, there's pin 14. Pin 14 is going to this side right here of the buffer chip. Now let's scroll over a little bit. It's all annoying because it goes to different sheets. I'm pretty sure the MD signals are the side of the RAM going through the buffer that then talks to the video chip. And that pin 2 on each of these RAM chips is the side that is directly connected to the CPU. Now let's just go through all of these chips on pin 2 and see if we see any activity, because I certainly didn't see any activity so far. That's just nothing. And that would kind of indicate that the computer's not actually doing anything. Like the CPU is not running any code. All right, that one is just high. And when I hit reset, no change. And that's low. Yep, low again. That one is just stuck high. Same thing and same thing. So again, they're all just high, which just sort of reeks of the CPU not actually executing any code. Now, because the SAM chip is busy getting the RAM to refresh itself and talk to the video display controller to display, well, nothing. It's just junk, because this thing is just, it's whatever's in the RAM when you first turn on the computer, which is probably that pattern we're seeing. That's probably what this activity here, or what you see on the scope right now, is. And if I go through and we look at this pin on all of these chips, we're probably going to expect to see the same thing. Now I'm on pin 14, which I think on these chips is technically the output pin. And the other pin 2 is the input pin. And if the computer were actually running, sorry, I'm just checking everything. Yep, this all looks basically identical. If the computer were actually running right now, we would see stuff happening for sure on the RAM chips going into them on pin 2, and we're not. So this is really leading right now to the fact that the CPU is not working or the ROMs aren't working as the problem. Let me scroll back up to the CPU here, and let's take a look at the address lines now. So address line 0 starts at pin 8. Okay, so there we are with the CPU on address line 0, and we got a floating line. What? Let's check the other ones. 9 is floating. Yeah, what's happening here? Everything is just floating. What I'm not sure about is if the 6809 has a mode where you can like pull a line high and it deactivates the address lines. It probably does. So let me go take a quick look at the data sheet. Okay, take a look at this. Clock inputs E and Q. Remember we were taking a look at these signals here. Q, that's obviously a Q in and E in. Remember how the Q in had no signal at all on it? The E and Q are clock signals required by the 6809. Q must lead E. That is, the transition on Q must be followed by a similar transition on E after a minimum delay. Addresses will be valid from the MPU. We saw that the CPU, or MPU in this case, what they're calling it, wasn't outputting any address lines, right? What if it's not getting a valid clock on Q in here, pin 35? Let me just make sure that that is the correct pin. And yes, 35 right there is Q. So both of those should have a valid clock signal. And let's go back to the oscilloscope here. I am pretty positive, everyone, that we are not getting a valid clock on that signal, on that pin, I mean. That is pin 35, and that is not a clock signal. 34 has a clock signal. 35, no clock signal. I'm just pushing down on the socket here with the probe, see if that actually makes contact, and there's no change. So let's go full screen here and try to figure out where that pin goes. There, 35 here. Goes here, drops off there to the cartridge connector. Okay, well, nothing's connected to the cartridge, so it is not that. And it goes over to sheet, I guess, A. Oh, okay, here is A right here. So wait, which line was it? It was, okay, A has 3 lines on it, and we are looking for Q, which is the middle. Okay, so there's the 3 lines. Okay, here it is. It's going to the SAM chip. Let's check the SAM on pin 13 here, because that's critical. Okay, when I bring this up, there it is. There's that signal with no clock. So this is Q, we're getting nothing, and the next one, there it is, there's that clock signal. A little bit less noise on it than when we look at the CPU, but yeah, basically these should be slightly offset from each other, from my understanding, and we're getting a big old nothing. Now, that doesn't mean that this chip is bad though. There could be a problem on the CPU, because it might be pulling that line high, and that this thing can't drive it anymore. I mean, that's a good possibility. And at this point, I'm gonna take the CPU out of this socket. I already took the SAM out and I tried a different one, and that was in the Super Mini Mail Call video, and it didn't really do anything. There was no change, that is, but I didn't check with an oscilloscope. But I wanna see if the CPU is doing something with that line. Now, if all these chips were soldered in there and I wasn't getting that proper clock, I know the problem is going to be one of these two chips. Now, I would most likely suspect the SAM, but because I already did swap that out, I'm going to suspect that it could be the CPU. Just make sure the computer is off. And let's pop the CPU out. Now, I have no idea if it's normal for the CPU on these computers to be in a socket or not. Okay, this thing is really tough and tight. So let's use this Weehead chip lifter to try to get this CPU out. Okay, there we go. Came out without too much trouble. I don't know if these are failure prone or not. I don't really think they are, but you never know. Okay, so first off, let's take a look at the video capture with the CPU out. Okay, we're getting exactly the same image. Oops, I have it on the wrong setting. There it is, full. Same thing, we're getting a little chunky missing square there, but that is not a problem. That is just the way the RAM is refreshing through the SAM to the video chip. If I power cycle it, it looks slightly different. What I want to see with the computer on is, do we have that clock signal now on pin 35, the Q signal? Is it suddenly there? We do not have that signal there. It is just missing. Interesting. Okay, well, that appears that it is not the CPU that is problematic, so I'm going to pop that back into this machine. Of course, first I'm going to add a little Deoxit to the socket. Now, my Deoxit can ran out of propellant, which is why I have it in this little squeezy bottle here. I had to puncture a hole in the side of the can and drain it all out. So I didn't want to waste it, basically. Now, I think I'm going to take the SAM out. Now, one thing is that I don't know. And let me just talk about this real quick by looking at the schematics. Where's the SAM? That's the CPU there. So the thing is, there might be some kind of a signal that maybe like halts the CPU. Like, I don't know if there's any use case where that clock signal would stop. Like, maybe it's doing that on purpose. I don't know. And that's sort of a mystery to me, because I just don't really understand the architecture of this machine, and I haven't gone through and carefully read everything there is to read about this architecture. But taking a look at this SAM chip, everything looks okay. No bent pins, everything is fine. Obviously at this point, if we turn this on and we go to pin 13, yeah, this signal of course is just low because it's generated by the SAM chip itself. I think 14, what was the other clock signal? Let's go look at the schematic here. Yeah, 14 and 13. So 13 right here, it's just at ground, and 14 it's floating. Now the SAM chip itself is actually generating that 0.89 megahertz, and here's a 14.318 megahertz clock. It's obviously divided down probably for like the video chip and stuff, but I think internally it is going to be creating that 0.89 megahertz. And there's probably some other clock signals maybe that come out of here. I mean, there's the RAS and CAS, so this is definitely refreshing the RAM. It's really the heart of this whole machine. All right, well, I went and grabbed the Coco 2 board that I took the SAM off of last time. So there's the CPU, here's the SAM chip. Now this is the board. If you saw that video, it was kind of left for dead. The computer that I found it in, oops, I bent the pin. It was very rusty. And in fact, you can see like some of the rust right here on the cartridge slot. And I think the power button is working, but the whole thing is corroded. But believe it or not, this board just worked. Well, last time I tried it, it worked. I don't know if it works anymore. In fact, actually, it's not going to work anymore because the RF modulator is missing, and that Motorola video chip, this one right here, that does that video generation, is inside of this. And the reason why I took it off is because I use that chip on something else. I was actually trying to do an RF modulator mod on another Coco 2 that is. So that's why that machine's a bit pillaged. But the rest of those chips should be all good. So let's make sure this machine is off. It is. There's no power LED. And, oh, you know what? Let me put Deoxit in there first, because it doesn't look like I applied any. Really, the point of the Deoxit is to help lubricate the pins, especially on this crusty old chip here, and make sure that it makes as good contact as possible. All right, I'm holding it on pin 13. Let's turn this on. Look at that. Clock. 13. 14. Okay, we're getting bad contact here. Scratch through it. All right, well, let's just check it on the CPU here. 498765. There it is. Pin 35 has a clock now. And the next pin down has a clock. So now we have a valid clock on the CPU. So that does confirm, unfortunately, that this chip is bad. I'm just going to draw an X on here. Well, that's disappointing because it's a bespoke chip, but I guess I don't know how findable these are. Maybe 74LS783s are pretty common, so I'll go check on eBay. I mean, obviously, I don't mind pillaging off this board right here because that's what this is for. I kept this for this exact reason, to fix other machines, but if I have any other machines with a bad SAM, that takes the whole computer out. Now, okay, we have good clocks. Let's go back to the video capture and see if we have a video signal. All right, just like before, we still do not have a valid picture. So there are more problems with this machine. I mean, we have a good clock now, but we definitely had a bad SAM. So let's go back and take a look at these pin 2s and see if we have activity on the RAM again. That still doesn't seem like it's executing any code whatsoever. Nothing is actually happening here. Let's check the address lines. Okay, so the address line is floating in exactly the same way. There is just, that's it, it's floating. Like the CPU is not even attempting to do anything. In fact, if we look at the 6809 here, if you remember from my video on the Southwest Technical PC 6800 computer, VMA, valid memory address, that is pin 36. That line needs to be high for the machine to be outputting a valid memory address. And I have a feeling that line is not going to be high. Maybe it's going to be floating or something, I don't know. So there it is, that is pin 36. If I power cycle the machine, nothing at all. So the CPU is not, it's not even executing. It's not even trying to talk to the ROMs. The first thing that should happen when the computer turns on is that the CPU should start to execute code and go to the ROMs and like fetch the first interrupt vector or the reset vector and start running. It's not even doing that. Now, could it be, what does this halt pin do? 40. Let's look at pin 40. What is 40 exactly? Maybe this CPU is just halted. Nope, it's not. The halt signal has an asterisk in front of it, which means that the CPU is halted, whatever that does, when that signal is low. Oh, actually, so that's an output signal, and it's indicated when the CPU is in a halt condition. Well, the thing is, it's not. It's not an input, it's an output, but it was high. It would be low if the CPU were halted. I'm kind of suspecting that there's something wrong with this CPU. The CPU does not seem to be working properly. Okay, so there is a TSC pin. 3-state control will cause the address, data, and read-write buffers to assume a high impedance state. Is that pin hooked up? It is. It is indeed. What? Oh, no, that's just grounded. So it has to be high. And when that goes high, that will disconnect the CPU from the data bus entirely, well, all the buses. It's useful in like a multiprocessor system. If you have a 6809 and say a 6502 coexisting, you would set that high and that would just cause this chip to become invisible. But that's not even connected. Basically what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to find reasons why this chip's not doing anything at all. We know it has a good clock, but it's not doing anything. So we know TSC's not even doing anything. It's tied low. We know reset looked okay because it's reset low, so when that signal is at 5 volts, the CPU should be running. VMA is low, which means it's not even outputting a valid address. Busy, LIC, BS, and BA, those are all not even connected. The interrupts won't do anything. Halt is an output signal. That's just tied high, and that's not doing anything anyways. I really wonder where this goes. Cartridge connector. Okay, I don't know what that does, but it goes to the cartridge connector. There's clock signals, there's a read rep, and that's it. I'm saying this CPU is bad. Okay, I'm powering this thing off. I'm pulling the CPU out, and I'm gonna pop in a different one. I'm gonna take it from that other board, because this CPU, it reeks of just not working at all, which is just terrible. If both of these chips are bad, I mean, this one definitely seems bad, but both? All right, here is the CPU from 1983. Let's get that out of there. The pins on this IC are very crusty. I'm gonna try to use sandpaper to smooth them a bit. Okay, so that's definitely a lot better now after a little bit of sandpaper. So hopefully that's gonna make good contact in the socket there. Let me just get the pin straightener here, or the lead straightener thingy I have. There's already Deoxit in the socket. Okay, CPU is in. Without bringing up the video, with the CPU in there, notches towards the top, so is it with this. Let's turn it on. Let's take a look at these data lines. Okay, look at that. We have activity. That was data line, well, whatever the first chip is, 0 or whatever. Okay, well, I just checked a couple. Let's switch over to the video signal. Look at that. It freaking works. It freaking works. Kind of unbelievable, isn't it? We had a dead CPU and a bad SAM chip. Yeah, I really didn't expect that. I really am under the impression that these CPUs are very reliable, and I don't think the SAM chips regularly fail either. I think the hunches that people had when the computer wasn't working was that it was probably one of the ROM chips that wasn't working, but clearly that's not the case. Now, remember this had those wires all on the cartridge connector or whatever? Maybe that shorted out both of these chips, who knows? Maybe that killed something. I don't know what happened to this machine, but obviously it took out the CPU, it just wasn't even doing anything, but for sure this SAM chip is bad. Now, because we know the CPU is dead, let's put this SAM chip back in, just to verify that it's not gonna work with that SAM chip. And I mean, those clock signals definitely weren't there. So let's get this out of there. And I'm gonna, I really, there's no way this is gonna work with this original SAM chip in there. Okay, so that SAM chip's back in, turn this on. There it is, not working. Yep, it's because those clock signals are not correct. So, oops, I correctly identified the fact that, yeah, bad clock signal there on that SAM chip. So this parts machine, I'm really glad I have this parts machine, honestly, because it just means I have these chips on hand. So SAM chip is in there. Let's see this work again. There it is, freaking works. So a bad 6809 that just appears totally dead, and a SAM chip that at the minimum has a missing clock output that is causing it to not work. Okay, well the machine is at least booted, as we can see here, but I need to put that keyboard back on so we can see if I can actually type stuff. And then we can pop in a cartridge and, you know, try some software and things like that. All right, so keyboard is back on. Let's turn this on again. Okay, we got our extended color basic, and that's because this has the 2 ROM chips right here. So this, oh, backspace. Where's backspace? I guess there's no backspace. This is a keyboard. Appears to be working. I'm just gonna go through all the keys. And it appears that all of the keys work perfectly. So that's kind of cool. The melted keyboard was filthy, but functional. All right, well, I do have a cartridge that was sent in along with this machine here. It's Downland, and let's give this cartridge a test. Okay, I think it's in there. Power this up, and we can test the sound output. All right, we got a working cartridge. Let's get some audio hooked up here to figure out if the sound output is working. All right, so let's see if this one is audio out. Has someone drew a black mark on it? Okay, I don't know. You know, I'll plug into one of each. I'll use coupler here, plug in the other channel of my speaker into it. How exactly do you start this game without having a joystick? I do have a joystick, I just don't have it handy. All right, there doesn't appear to be any sound. All right, well, oscilloscope to the rescue. Let's probe around on here to figure out if any sound is even coming out of the RF modulator, or going into the modulator, that is. I don't think this connector here, I don't think that's the sound that it was connected to. Let's turn this back on again. Okay, so this connector right here, this pin, I was seeing what looked like some activity on this scope. Yep, do you see that? That looks like sound right there. So I think this was just connected onto the wrong connection. Let's make sure we still have video, and we do. So the speakers, I'm just gonna unplug this again. Connect it to this one. I think we have sound, everyone. Reset. Nice. I'm assuming I need a joystick to use this game. I don't know if the keyboard works. All right, I'm gonna go grab a different cartridge in a second, but one thing we noticed is that the color, if you noticed, changed. If I hit reset here, okay, there it's kind of an orange color, but occasionally it's gonna be green, and that's because this machine has artifact color, just like the Apple II, but which artifact color you're gonna get is not consistent across power cycles. So a lot of games will say, do you see green or do you see red? Or is actually, I think the colors you're supposed to see are blue and orange. And which do you see? And I want you to select, because I think it supports white, black, orange, and blue. Why we're getting kind of a green color here and orange, I think might be something to do with this way this works, or maybe the artifact color on my RetroTink is not totally working. But either way, that is definitely an audio connection right there. Whoa, that's very loud. Okay, so here we have Frogger for the Coco. I don't know, the keys to operate the frog. There we go. Now the colors you're seeing, that is very color computer colors. I mean, I guess the dragon is gonna have the same kind of color scheme. That is just what the video chip can do that's in this thing. Now you can see that the video output is, well, let's, shall we say, not great. Oh, listen to the music. That's nice. It's actually producing 2 channels. So that's like, because the CPU is fast enough to drive this chip to actually simulate multiple channels. All right, well, I think I'm gonna end this video here. My voice is getting kind of raspy. Well, it's getting a little hard to talk because I have a bit of a sore throat. I hope I don't have human malware. I haven't yet had it throughout this whole thing we've been going through. So I don't wanna have this be the time, but no, I think I just have a cold. It really feels like a cold. But tomorrow, if I still have symptoms, I will go get a test, and I'll make sure that I don't have the human malware. But anyhow, yeah, so 2 bad chips, a bad CPU, and the bad, what is it called? Max? SAM, it's the SAM chip, bad SAM chip. So we saw that there was a missing clock frequency coming out of the SAM chip, and that the CPU, once I replaced the SAM and it was getting both their clocks, it was absolutely doing nothing. I had like nothing on the address bus, nothing on the data bus, a clear indicator that there was a problem with the CPU. So we replaced the CPU, and then, well, as we can see, the computer fired right up. Anyhow, I hope you found my very first TRS-80 Color Computer diagnostic session interesting. And this actually reminds me that I have a Dragon 32 machine, a PAL Dragon 32 machine, here in the basement that also needs some troubleshooting. So because architecturally it's basically identical to this machine, that might be kind of fun to try out. Although, if it has a bad SAM chip, because it will certainly have the SAM chip in there, well, I don't have any more spares. So maybe I'll need to go on eBay or AliExpress and try to get some of those. I'm just looking at the pictures here. It's very funny. I'll need to buy some replacement parts. I'm pretty sure I have extra CPUs, but I don't think I have a SAM chip, but maybe I do. Anyways, so that is going to be that. I want to thank my patrons. Their names are scrolling up the side of the screen. If you want to become a patron, you can do so at the link in the description below. I have a merch store. You can check that out. There's a merch store link somewhere on my YouTube page. I don't know. There's a link in the description below as well, but I think there's a place you can buy t-shirts and stuff like that. I'm going to try to add more stuff like stickers, things like that are cheaper and easier. If you don't want to buy a t-shirt, for instance, maybe a sticker might be fun with the logo, things like that. And yeah, second channel, it's got all the Super Mini mail call videos like the one where I unpacked this machine and initially tested it. So if you aren't subscribed over there, I really recommend you go check it out and definitely hit that subscribe button. It helps me out a lot. The more subscribers I get on the second channel, the more ad revenue it will get, the more coverage it gets from YouTube, and that just helps me all around. So that is gonna be that. So stay healthy, stay safe, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.